There's just like life. Um, all right. Well, we will go ahead and start.
Okay.
And I have a little theme song that I do for Nosh Schmooze. It goes, "It's Nosh Schmooze, Nosh Schmooze, where we talk about cool stuff concerning the Jews and everybody else." Welcome everybody to Nosh Schmooze. I'm here today with Rabbi Jill Hammer, and we're so thrilled and honored to have her with us today. And we're going to talk about Kohenet and Jewish mysticism and being a Kohenet. And as always, if you have questions or comments for Rabbi Hammer, please leave them in the comment section and I will field them to her. But first, a bit about Rabbi Jill Hammer. PhD, author, scholar, ritualist, poet, and dream worker, Rabbi Jill Hammer is the director of spiritual education at the Academy for Jewish Religion and co-founder of the Kohenet Hebrew Priestess Institute. Her new book on Jewish mysticism is titled Return to the Place, the Magic, Meditation, and Mystery of the Sefer Yetzirah. Rabbi Hammer is also the author of other books, including The Hebrew Priestess, Ancient and New Visions of Jewish Women's Spiritual Leadership with Taya Sher, The Jewish Book of Days, A Companion for All Seasons, Sisters at Sinai, New Tales of Biblical Women, and The Book of Earth and Other Mysteries. She is the translator of the Romemu Siddur. And Rabbi Jill, we're so happy that you're here today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here.
And Rabbi Jill, there we go. I found us. And my first question for you is, what is a Kohenet?
So a Kohenet is a Hebrew priestess. It is both a new and very old form of spiritual leadership. Essentially, the Kohenet Hebrew Priestess Institute was founded to be a place where women could learn spiritual leadership from the perspective of women's history, with an emphasis on the divine feminine, with an emphasis on earth-based embodied spiritual leadership. And since then, we were founded in 2005, and since then we are training. We've trained about 100 people in the kind of leadership that we practice, and in with the content that we use. And a lot of our content is drawn from both the prophetesses, the wise women, midwives of ancient Israel, and their leadership styles, which we look at and study, and the shrine keepers of that time period. And also we look at women and other marginalized folks throughout Jewish tradition whose spiritual gifts may not have been so highlighted by what we were taught in Hebrew school, but have been really important to the development of Jewish civilization. And so we've created this new way of doing spiritual work in order to highlight these values in the Jewish world, and in order to bring a transformative view of ritual and spiritual life.
If I can see a theme in the work that you've done over the years, it seems like, bringing a fresh perspective and something new into the ancient, and the ancient into, what is relevant today. So I'm curious, do you feel like the role of a Kohenet has evolved since ancient times?
I mean, sure. I mean, this is a contemporary vision of this. We're not doing the same thing that people were doing in ancient Israel. But what we're doing that I think is unique is, first of all, sort of framing this material not as sort of secondary or something that's nice to learn if you'd like to, but the core is Talmud, for example. We're really looking at the history, the spiritual lives, the prayers, the practices, of women, and other folks, whose work is relevant to what we do. Other sort of prophets and magic workers, and we make that material central. That's where we draw our juice from. But we're really not seeking to sort of do exactly the same thing as what they might have done back then, but inspired by them to think about like what else is needed in the Jewish world today. We've had the same leadership model spiritually for a long time. What else is needed? And we were interested in something that would offer a liberatory view, of Judaism that is celebratory of the body, that is celebratory of the earth, that is explicitly feminist and interested in the liberation of all people. And also we are interested in really identifying what are the spiritual gifts of each of the people who come to us, and how might they go about manifesting sort of their version of the Hebrew priesthood.
I love that. I love, because I think oftentimes you come into like, I don't know, a new work role or something, and it's like, well, this is what you're going to do, as opposed to what do you have to bring to the table and, bring to the world. So how have you seen that? Is there an example of a manifestation of a particular Kohenet that had a special gift and this is how it manifested as a Kohenet?
Sure, I can give a couple of examples. I mean, one example I can give is sort of the amazing Sarah Shamira Chandler, who graduated the Kohenet Institute and is also an advocate for animal rights, and an amazing creator of ritual and liturgy. And one of the things that she has done is to take the pilgrimage festivals that used to be celebrated sort of as pilgrimages and recreate them at the Isabel Friedman Jewish Retreat Center, so that on Shavuot, we make a procession with the first fruits from the farm, every spring, and it's really amazing. And she's been the creator of that ritual for a number of years now. So that's one example. But we also have people who create amazing sacred art, like Kohenet Becca Starr, who has created 13 different chamsas, each one representing a different version of the Hebrew priestess that we study at Kohenet. So, she does her work through her art. Or Kohenet Shoshana Brown, who is, creating context for activism, for ritual context where people can express their desire for justice and liberation. So there's lots of, or we have poets and we have chaplains and, we have midwives and we have rabbis and we have healers, very people who do healing work. There's a Kohenet Dori Midnight who does herbalism and who, and other than also teaches, but who priestesses through her healing. So lots of different faces of this work.
It's incredible. I'm so glad that you're doing that. So you mentioned the number 13. I'm curious, the different aspects of a Kohenet. Is that have something to do with the tribes or the Jewish calendar or?
Yeah, this is actually connected to our second topic, because we actually drew, at first we were looking for, we wanted to create a system of different pathways that our students would study. And so we looked at the different kinds of spiritual leadership that you see being exercised by women in the ancient world. Sort of what were they doing? And we started to look for the different ways that they did leadership. And then we also looked at the Sefer Yetzirah, which is this wonderful ancient book of Jewish mysticism, and that talks about the three mothers. And so we thought about groups of three. So we started with 9, and then we were 12, and then we went to 13, to sort of squeeze everybody in, 13, including the weaver archetype, which brings, different aspects together. But we wanted, some relatively accurate representation of the diversity of this kind of spiritual leadership of doing sacred work in the ancient world, which was true for priests and priestesses in all kinds of cultures, and certainly it was also true in ancient Israel. That it meant different things. It meant prophecy. It meant keeping sacred shrines. Right? It meant healing. It meant all kinds of different things. And so we picked these 13, and the 13 we picked are. And our students continue to reinterpret these, so they've changed over the years. But we picked the maiden, the midwife, the prophetess, the mother, the wise woman, the shrine keeper, the guardian, the mourning woman, the shamaness or spirit channel, the seeker, the lover, and the fool. Those are the 13.
I feel like in some way we all harness, pieces of those, and maybe they come out in different ways, or maybe sometimes they're hidden for many years, or they're just in like different, life cycle events or chapters in your life. I love that, like, you can kind of see yourself in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the ways that people work with it is they think about, well, which of these is needed now? Which of these hats should I put on right now? And it allows us to call on different aspects of ourselves.
So how did you come about creating the Kohenet Hebrew Priestess Institute?
Yeah. So when I went to rabbinical school, I was very excited to study rabbinic text. I was very excited to learn more about ritual. I was already doing a lot of work in the area of ritual and midrash and sort of creative interpretation of sacred texts. These were all things that I was excited about. And one of the things that was hard when I got to rabbinical school was there was a lot of text. A lot of it was sort of exclusionary of or derogatory about sort of women and sort of other, marginalized people. And there wasn't a lot of time to talk about that. So there was just sort of this sense of, something's not right here. And I'm not really getting the space to address it. And so I began looking around, like, well, there was this sense of, well, yeah, the women came along in like 1970, and then we added them and now everything is okay. And then there was a sense, well, what about what happened before 1970? Like how did we get here? Why do we have a tradition where there are so many, there's so many male voices and so few, voices of other kinds? And I began to research ancient Israel, and I began to think about, well, there are priestesses in all these other cultures around ancient Israel, but we don't have priestesses in the Bible. Why is that? And then I looked closer and I was like, but we do have some priestesses in the Bible. We do have, for example, there's Miriam, who's playing a frame drum and dancing just like all the other priestesses in that area, right? And is associated with a priestly family. Where there's mention of women keeping the gate of the shrine, keeping the door of the shrine in the book of Exodus. So once you begin to look for it, it's not emphasized and it's not taught, but it's there. And I thought, oh, actually, there is a lineage to this. Like it's not that we were the only people in the ancient Near East who didn't have this, it was there. And I began to read about it. I got excited about it. And I felt that I wanted something that existed in real time, that existed now. And there were women doing things, other people doing things, but not, not an organized effort.
Okay, so you're frozen, Rabbi Jill, and I'm wondering if maybe you need to like leave the room and come back in. Let's see. Maybe I'm frozen. Maybe that's what's happening. Okay. Let's see. It looks like I'm still live streaming right now. Oh, okay. So I'm sure Rabbi Jill's gonna pop right back in. Okay. Thank you for the comments, guys. I appreciate it. But in the meantime, actually what I will do is in the comments for you, there we go. All the ways that you can connect with Rabbi Jill and Kohenet. And also you can access her new book through the press who's doing her new book, Return to the Place. And also there's also a link to another one of her books, Hebrew Priestess, Ancient Spiritual Leadership, which you can get on Amazon. But they're all really incredible resources. Rabbi Jill, I just want to read you a couple of comments about this new book that she just came out with in September. Sefer Yetzirah has been called the foundational text of Jewish mysticism, but despite many scholarly attempts to explain it, readers still find its language baffling and its message indecipherable. Now Rabbi Jill Hammer has clarified the text for all of us without ruining its mystery. She reveals its cosmic vision of space, time, and body soul. Beyond this, she has created a new ancient meditative practice based on this mystical masterpiece. Her superb achievement is a gift for us all. And that's by Dr. Daniel Matt, who's author of The Essential Kabbalah, The Heart of Jewish Mysticism. So if you want to learn more about Kohenet, we're back. All right. I was just singing your praises via, people who are writing quotes about your new book.
Oh, that's so great.
So before we move on to your new book, I'm just curious if I want to be a Kohenet, is there a prerequisite? What do I have to do?
All right, so if you want to be a Kohenet, first of all, lots of us are already priestesses, but you can go to our website, kohenet.com or kohenet.org. If you just want to be part of our community, we have classes that we offer to everybody, and sometimes events. And we have a retraining program that you can apply for. We start a new one on the East Coast every 2 years and on the West Coast every 2 years. So once a year, there's an opportunity to join a program. You join a cohort, and it's a 3-year program.
I'm guessing it's Rabbi Jill.
And oh no, really?
I can hear you now.
Okay, good. And my connection is usually good, so I'm surprised. And some classes in between, and we have a beautiful, ceremony at the end, and the community is very close. People really get to know one another in addition to themselves over the course of the program. We have experiential learning as well as text learning, as well as ritual, and it's a beautiful supportive community as well as the program.
And I think also, if you want to stay up to date with what's going on with Kohenet and classes being offered, you can sign up for the newsletter, right?
Absolutely, can go to the website and sign up for the newsletter and find out about Shabbat and classes and all those things.
And I've already shared a link with everybody. If they want to go to kohenet.org, you have the link for that. And also for your new book, which I want to talk about next. Right. So tell me, this book focuses on the Sefer Yetzirah, right? Mm-hmm. Which is considered like a foundational book of Jewish mysticism. But what is it? For those of us that don't know.
So Sefer Yetzirah is this wonderful cryptic little ancient Jewish book. It means the book of creation. It is not a book of law. It's not really a book of story. It's really kind of a mystical primer. It sort of gives you a tour of God's process of creation, and then kind of invites you into meditating on and exploring that process of creation yourself. And it's very short. It's one of the shortest Jewish ancient books we have. It's written in like these little. Well, people often read this and are like, I have no idea what it's saying, and they put it down. But it's actually so beautiful. It really describes God using the alphabet, the letters of creation, to create the world. And each letter has a different function. Each letter makes a different entity in the world. And this process of letter creation is all about turning oneness into manyness. And then the meditative process the book describes really has to do with how do I, as a created finite being, get back to connection with the one? So how do I experience this miraculous whole that I'm part of, right? And not just sort of my own little part of it. So the book is called Return to the Place because the book, the ancient book advises us to return to the place when we get distracted, when we're trying to be in prayer or in meditation and we become distracted, and we have to just keep returning our consciousness, right, to the focus, to the place. It's a book that has really influenced me. And just to connect this to our earlier conversation, one thing that's wonderful about it is that it's very egalitarian in its approach to gender. It doesn't sort of exclude or discriminate against the feminine. And the entities that God works with to create the world, the elements and the directions are all they're feminine. So God works with entities called the three mothers. The Aleph, the Mem, and the Shin are known as the three mothers. And Aleph is air, Mem is water, and Shin is fire. And God works with these three entities to create the physical world. So it has this really interesting and powerful role for the feminine, and that's part of what attracted me to the book.
Do you feel, I don't know that you knew there was a pandemic coming when you started the process of creating this book. Do you feel that, it's relevant in the world that we're living in right now?
Oh yeah, because it really has advice for us about how to be present, sort of no matter what's happening. One of the categories in the book are called the double letters, the letters in Hebrew that grammatically double, like bet and vet. And it uses those letters to explore the idea of, there's life and there's death, right? There's suffering and there's joy. There's abundance and there's lack. And humans experience all those things over the course of our lives, right? And all of those dualities in Sefer Yetzirah get kind of reconciled into a center, into God at the center. And I think it's a really useful practice for right now when things really, for many people are difficult. And Sefer Yetzirah really focuses on this world, on how we can experience God and spirit and creation and our own creativity in this world, not by going somewhere else, like to some paradise, but really staying here in our bodies. And I find that really helpful and grounding as well. And I also think the book has a lot to say about global warming. And it doesn't talk about global warming, but it talks about the centrality and the beauty of and the order of the earth. And how connected we are to it and how necessary it is to us.
Wow. One moment.
Sure.
So I'm just curious in terms of like what you personally have discovered or uncovered about this text in your research that previously remained a mystery to you in creating this book.
Great. So the first way that I encountered the Book of Creation was through Aryeh Kaplan's translation. Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan was a translator of Jewish mystical works. He had a big influence. His way of reading Sefer Yetzirah is really to think about it as a book of Kabbalah. But as I began to study Sefer Yetzirah more in depth, what I realized, and many scholars say this, is that it's not really a book of Kabbalah, right? It's earlier than the Kabbalah, and its concepts are its own. It has its own version of Jewish mysticism, and it has its own version of how to be in connection with God and the world. And as I began to realize that, the book became even more interesting to me, because instead of being sort of some sort of kind of offbeat version of a Kabbalah that we learn about in lots of other books, it really is its own exploration, its own journey into divine creativity and into the human divine connection. So that's something that I discovered that was important to me. I also spent a lot of time delving into gender in this book and thinking about the relationship between God and the elements and God and the letters, and the way that the book portrays these feminine elemental energies is very powerful and central. So that's led to a lot of a lot of spiritual practice for me around working with these three letters. According to the Sefer Yetzirah, human beings connect to these letters through the body. The Aleph lives in your chest where the air is. So you can breathe the Aleph right there. The Mem lives in the belly. The water is down there. That's where the Mem lives. And the Shin, the fire, is up here at the crown of your head. The Shin is the head. And so I developed a meditative practice based on these letters, really, that the book implies. And I used to put my daughter to bed with that, with that practice of the three mothers. And
oh, I love that. I'm gonna have to adopt that.
It's pretty great. It works.
So you mentioned, like, with your work with the Kohenet, that there's these, ancient texts and things that it hasn't necessarily been embodied for our entire, Jewish history, and how this Sefer Yetzirah, like, is really about being embodied, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, it's called Return to the Place, and obviously, internally, meditatively, we can, like, return to that place. Do you feel like it's also important to have an actual place to, like, physically to return to?
Oh, yeah. I mean, one of the things that fascinates me about the spirituality of the ancient world, right, is that there was a time when Jews were very connected to the earth as a site of their spiritual practice, right? They had altars, they had shrines, they had sacred trees, and, like, those were places where they could feel connected. And over time, and particularly when the Jewish people went into exile, right, there was this connection to the text, right? The book was the place that you returned to, right? The text was the sort of the place where you found God, and still many Jews find God there. And there is, for me, this sense in this generation that in some way we need the medicine they had back then. Like, we need this sense of place. We need this sense of connection to the earth, to the body, to what's real, right? To what connects us to each other. And maybe we need less this sort of abstraction of the human experience and more a sense of grounding, so that we are focused on what's really here with us. So that
Mm-hmm.
feels like that feels like a really important piece of what I take away from these practices. I want to say that when you begin to look for what we could call priestesses, they're called lots of different things in lots of different places over time, and even among Jews, that really this sort of parallel practice that often has to do with material culture, with healing items, and with amulets, and with rituals that are very close to the home. That really continues throughout. You see Sephardic women working with with ritual. You see women in Eastern Europe, connecting to their ancestors, via visits to graves. Like, there really is a very strong culture that Jewish women have added to our civilization, but we don't focus on it much. And I think a lot of that is what we need. And I want to say also, because I talk a lot about women, that it's not just women, right? It was, people who weren't part of the rabbinic elite, right? It was non-binary people. It was, like, men who weren't necessarily literate. Like, the material culture practices were important to everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it's important to remember that. Yeah. So I do have a question here from Barbara Bell Siegel, who's actually our religious director at Temple Bethel. And she says, if I were a priestess in ancient times, would I have been permitted to study Kabbalah? And then she has a follow-up question. How do we incorporate more feminism in Jewish study?
Okay, great.
I think you're the best person to ask.
So Kabbalah didn't really come into being until the Middle Ages. So ancient priestesses wouldn't have been studying Kabbalah. What they would probably have been doing is serving at shrines, right? Doing prophetic work that is, could have been going into trance or using divination. Like they found a big jar of knuckle bones that were probably used for divination in the town of Avo. It might have meant doing healing work for people. So those were the kinds of things priestesses were up to back then. And they might have been literate. There were priestesses who were scribes in ancient Sumer, for example. But in terms of studying Kabbalah, one of my inspirational priestess sources is actually from Sfat in the 16th century, where the Kabbalist Chaim Vital kept a diary. And one of the things he talks about in his diary is all the women he was in contact with. And often they were talking about dreams and they were talking about visions. And so he was in contact with women who weren't necessarily considered to be scholars, although some of them might have been, but who were understood to be visionaries. And who were part of the Kabbalistic community, through their dreams and their visions, were a very active part of the community, in terms of practical Kabbalah. So if you were a priestess in Sfat in the 16th century, you could have studied Kabbalah. Right. But let me take the second part of the question. Which is that there are all kinds of really great ways to include feminism, in our Jewish study today. And for me, the most important one really has to be with how we shift our frame. Because a lot of what we've been taught about what's important about Jewish history, if you start to look at it and break it down, these things are important, and we can see that the focus is on male intellectual culture. Right. So, what do we get taught in rabbinical school? Right. We get taught about Torah, and we get taught about Talmud, right, which is lots of sages talking to each other. Right. We get taught about halakha, Jewish law, which again is lots of Jewish sages talking to each other. And if we get taught history, we're probably focusing on male figures in history, with a couple of exceptions. But there are other things we could study. We could look at the people who are developing this material culture. We could look at clothing. We could look at diaries. We can look at family life. We could study people like Regina Jonas, who was the first woman rabbi in early in the 20th century in Germany, and who served the Jewish people before and during Auschwitz, and was almost forgotten. She wasn't talked about by her teachers, and she died, and people didn't know about her. And then a female dissertation student discovered her diary, not her diary, I'm sorry, discovered her thesis in Berlin. And now we know about her work. So it's necessary for us to continue investigating and researching and bringing that to our Jewish learning.
Absolutely. And I think about just, you were talking about when you were studying, in school, and how it was kind of glossed over and whatnot, just like any textbook with any marginalized society, it's just kind of glossed over for the most part. And I'm so grateful that you're, writing these new texts now that are, bringing light to these really important women and that feminine voice, because we obviously need more of that in the world. And Barbara Bell Siegel says, thank you for that answer. And so I'm just curious, like, what is your research process for this book? Because it seems like it's, it could be very extensive. I'm curious, like, where do you start with all of this?
So it's funny, I really came to Sefer Yetzirah very naively. I picked it off a shelf and I was like, I love this. I'm going to learn about this. I'm going to teach this. And over the years, I discovered more and more about the book, and there was just so much. And at some point, I received the opportunity through a very generous donor to spend time researching and writing the book. And I knew that I had to be completely dedicated. Like, I couldn't have other work, because it was really such an intense labor. And I read a lot of critical works. I read a lot of, contemporary research scholars on the book. But I also really read the book as a poet. What is it saying to me? What does the language here imply to me? So, some of the book is, people have been talking about the way the book is a kind of a combination of scholarly and spiritual, that, it has a lot of depth in a scholarly way, that I wanted that. but it also really comes out of my experience as a rabbi and a priestess, of what are these texts for? Like, what do they want us to experience? Because this is a book that doesn't just want to tell us something; it wants us to have an experience. And that is what I'm trying to bring out in the book: is what is the connection? What is the experience that this book is inviting us to have? And so that's why there are meditative exercises in the book, in addition to the scholarship.
I love that. I had a friend I lived with at Elat Chaim who talked about how Hebrew text, it feels like we're trying to live in a blueprint, as opposed to, actually building the house and having that experience.
Yes.
And I feel like that's, what you're bringing to the table. So in terms of that, and thinking about, the future of the Jewish tribe and, what will happen next, how do you feel like these writings and Kohenet and bringing that feminine voice to Judaism will impact, the future of the Jewish people?
We're already seeing such wonderful impact from our graduates, who are going out and being chaplains and healers and ritualists and serving people in all kinds of ways. And I think there really has been this. I do feel that there's been this subtle impact on the Jewish community of having to pay more attention to this material, and think about it. Having to think about the sources that talk about the God in the feminine, because that's a thing that we bring out in our prayer book. So in some way, I feel like the impact is already unfolding, and I also feel that the world is changing very fast. There is this, things are becoming more democratized, more online, right? Communities are focusing on the things that matter to them most, as opposed to everybody kind of being in this very traditional mode of a synagogue that looks like this, right? Or a temple that looks like this. And I think the Kohanot are very well suited to serve that kind of diverse Jewish community, because they're learning how to create rituals for new experiences, right? Or to make holidays more meaningful, right, in the contemporary world. Or how do we use ritual to as protest or to create justice in the world? And these are questions that our students have been dealing with and working on, and now we're really seeing the need for those things very urgently in the world.
And I know some of your Kohanot, were working on that extensively before they became Kohanot.
Absolutely.
And I think that, going through this process has just, made it deepen that process so much more.
Absolutely.
I have to say that growing up, I felt like not hearing those Jewish feminine voices, like I in some way was mourning those women that I didn't know, that were not written about, that we didn't hear their voices growing up. And so I'm so grateful that you are bringing their voices alive in your text and in your work. And I'm gonna once again put that link for Kohenet in here. And also it's in the comments here if you're watching on Facebook. And we'll also post it to our website, also for Return to the Place. And for Hebrew Priestess, Ancient Spiritual Leadership. I'm wondering if very briefly, if you could just talk about that book for a moment.
Sure. So the Hebrew Priestess, Ancient New Visions of Jewish Women's Spiritual Leadership, is kind of the textbook for Kohenet. Essentially, it takes each of these 13 pathways and looks at ancient examples, sort of looks at Miriam and Deborah, looks at the shrine keepers, looks at the wise women, and then looks at contemporary examples, sort of who is living out this pathway and how are they doing it in our world, and then a practice that anybody can engage in. So, for example, the practice for the chapter on the prophetess is on dreams. How do we, live into our dreams as messages that we should take seriously? Or the chapter on the seeker, sort of on the one who is journeying, who's seeking. The practice is pilgrimage. How do we use travel as a way to connect spiritually? So it in some ways lays out some of the material that we use in the program.
Cool. So like maybe you should read that if you're thinking about applying to be a Kohenet.
Absolutely. And we have a prayer book also, and you can write on the website if you're interested. We have a prayer book where the Hebrew is largely feminized, and we have a lot of additions and wonderful new poems, and it's great.
Amazing. Well, I'm grateful that I have a daughter that I can share all this with. And thank you, Rabbi Jill, for everything you're doing in the world. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you everybody for watching and joining us. And I'm wondering if you had one prayer to leave us with, for the world today and women. What would that be?
Mm. My prayer would be that we learn how to ground ourselves in compassion, that we learn how to ground ourselves in the clear experience of our own bodies and of one another, so that we're really able to meet the world with love, and with a wise love, with a love that allows for the blossoming of the potential of individuals and communities. That would be my prayer.
Thank you. May it be so. Can you hear it, son? All right. Bye, everybody. Have a wonderful week. We will not do, we're on break now. This is the end of Nosh Schmooze for the year. We'll see you on January 12th again with Steph Taylor talking about Miami Girls Rock Camp and how she's helping girls rock out.